Okay, so today we're going to look at instruction, specifically structured literacy, and the different components of how we teach students with dyslexia. Okay, so we'll first take a look at why instruction fails. So often what happens is that we fail to teach to the correct percentage of accuracy. And we did discuss this in one of the previous presentations, that when we're looking for proficiency, we're looking for about 95% of an accuracy score when a student is reading. If we teach under that, then we're teaching below instructional and at the frustration level. So we need to make sure that before we move on, we're at that percent of accuracy. We fail to teach all the skills, lack progress monitoring and data-driven decision making, lack measurable goals and objectives. Sometimes teachers try to work with what they have and create their own materials, their scope and sequence and curriculum. And it's very important that instruction that's provided for students with dyslexia is research-based and data-driven. They sometimes districts change their programs at different grade levels, so there's no consistency in program implementation. There's not necessarily a curriculum adopted by the district that's consistently followed. There's lack of teacher training. Hopefully, with our new dyslexia laws, this is no longer an issue. A lot of the research, which we'll discuss today on dyslexia and RTI, is that the model is ineffective for children with dyslexia unless there's more information obtained about the child's difficulties. And we're lacking daily instruction, providing that intensive review of these skills as frequently as needed. So other interventions that do not work and do not have research to support their effectiveness working with children with dyslexia is guided reading, balanced literacy, learning centers, hooked on phonics, reading recovery, accelerated reader, and vision therapy. So these are some things that are not proven to be effective when working with children with dyslexia. Okay, so we'll take a look at RTI and dyslexia and the research. There is a lot of research showing that RTI is an ineffective model to use in isolation for children with dyslexia. And my understanding is the main reason behind this is that RTI is sort of to determine what interventions need. So are they on tier 1, tier 2, tier 3? And not necessarily a diagnostic approach to determining what the child really is suffering with. So RTI provides early interventions that may help a child remediate skills, but reusing this model exclusively could be ineffective for dyslexic students. It is solely an instructional model, not a diagnostic one. So we need to complete assessments to determine if there are delays in phonological awareness and processing skills, rapid naming, orthographic skills to get a better idea of where to target that instruction. This information would then guide instruction. So when we look at the different tiers of RTI, here's a model from the Lindemood Bell programs. We look at tier 1, which is all of our students. Tier 2 is typically your students who get basic skills instruction. That's about 20 to 30% of our student population. And tier 3 is typically your special education students. That is the percentage is about 5 to 10% of your population. Some areas a little bit higher. So if you look at this model, there's a continuum from tier 1 all the way up to tier 3 that's on the top of students who have whole class instruction to small group and then get that intensive daily instruction. But there's consistency in every step of the way. So from tier 1 all the way up to tier 3, they're sort of following the same model. It's just the level of intensity and interventions increases as they go up. Here's another model that's looking at the Wilson reading program, looking at how we do tier 1 foundations and grades K3. And then if tier 2 is those basic skills, getting a double dose. For K3, getting more foundations. For 4 to 12, getting just words instruction. And then your tier 3, which is students typically in the resource center, in grades 2 to 12, we get the Wilson reading program, reading system implemented. So it's very important as a district to look at your models that are being followed and just making sure there's consistency, as well as in your INRS meetings, to making sure you're getting additional diagnostic information about the students and their learning. Okay. Well, according to International Dyslexia Association, structured literacy is an instructional practice that encompasses all approaches to reading instruction. It conforms to knowledge, research, and practice standards to teach dyslexic students. The term is not designed to replace Orton Gillingham, multisensory, or explicit phonics, these terms that we use all the time in our schools, but it's an umbrella term designed to describe all of these programs that teach reading the same way. Structured literacy is marked by several elements. It's the phonology, sound symbol association, syllable instruction, morphology, syntax, and semantics. All are taught systematic and cumulative. There's explicit instruction at every step, and it's very diagnostic in how we're teaching these skills. So we look at the ladder of reading and looking at the different levels of students and how they're learning. And structured literacy is something that benefits all students. So you see at the top tier, your typical learners, the kids who learn effortlessly, they have easy ways of learning through standard instruction. They're advantaged by structured literacy approach. But on the bottom two tiers, structured literacy approach is essential. So these are the kids that require code-based, explicit, and systematic instruction, and that learning to read is very difficult for them, and they need extensive practice. You can see how structured literacy focuses on all our students, but is essential for those children who struggle. The International Dyslexia Handbook is a great reference and a great tool for teachers and administrators to review, that gives you an outline of the importance of structured literacy and how we should be utilizing these approaches in our school. So I would suggest everyone take a look at that. It's easily obtainable in a PDF format, but look at the handbook for a review of what best practices and research is telling us at this point. Okay, so instruction needs to be explicit, which means concepts need to be clearly taught. It needs to be systematic, cumulative, and diagnostic. So we need to make sure that when we're looking at our programs, our structured literacy programs, we're following the research guidelines. So these programs are showing effectiveness based on certain frequency and duration of implementation. So the research might show if the program's implemented 3 times a week for 45 minutes, these are the results you're going to get. If you decide to change that and do 3 times a week, 20 minutes, or 2 times a week, 30 minutes, you're not going to get the same effects and outcome that the research was showing, because your implementation practices are not aligned to what the standards of that program are indicated. So we need to make sure the frequency and duration are aligned to the program, that we're following the scope and sequence, and that we're having ongoing embedded assessment and progress monitoring in our programs. Okay, so we'll take a look at the first STEM, which is word study, phonemic awareness. So this is how we're working with kids who lack the phonological awareness skills in just hearing words. What they cannot do is they cannot recognize or hear the individual sounds within a word. They hear the whole word, and that's it. They have difficulty breaking it apart to read it, and they have difficulty breaking it apart to spell the words. So we need to do practice word games almost with our students to make sure they can hear the individual phonemes and manipulate those phonemes when necessary. So we want to have them identify the phonemes in the words and manipulate the phonemes in the spoken words. As June Orton said, learning sounds of letters is of little use in itself, and that synthesizing them into spoken words was of cardinal importance and must carefully be taught. So we need to teach our kids not to just hear the letter sound correspondence in isolation, but to manipulate these within the words. So we need to practice blending and segmenting the sounds, syllable structure, and work on different prefix and suffix parts of words. When we teach the different types of sounds, we're also teaching 6-syllable types. So we want to make sure that we're focusing systematically on teaching the different types of syllables, the 6 syllables, and their rules, their exceptions as we build upon these skills. So most of the structured literacy programs, they have this built into the program. And the students will typically start by learning closed syllables and then transition into multisyllabic closed syllable words, and then build into vowel consonant single syllable and multisyllabic words. So as they learn new syllables, they learn to incorporate them into multisyllabic words. Okay, morphology is a great way to build comprehension and vocabulary skills, as well as spelling and decoding skills. So we teach the kids the base word and then the prefixes and the suffixes that go along with them. Between grades 4 and high school, knowledge of common English roots, prefixes, and suffixes is very, very important to word level reading success. So we go through some of the research on teaching morphology, and we see that this is a very important piece to teaching children to read more fluently, to increasing their spelling, as well as their comprehension and vocabulary. And morphology is instruction that we should be providing to all our students, typical and atypical learners, because it does increase their vocabulary skills, which in turn contributes to reading comprehension. And also their knowledge of morphemes and their spelling fosters quicker recognition of word parts and then more efficient decoding skills. Fluency, we always must remember that we have to get those accuracy levels first before we even try to get a child to read fluently. So if they're not able to read a word without tapping it out, or they're still relying on other strategies and fluency, they're not ready for fluency, at least at that instructional level. When we look at fluency, we also want to consider the rhythm and prosody. So we can use different oral reading fluency scales, such as the one pictured here. I know it's a little blurry, but for a fluent reader in grade 4, we want them to, for a fluent reader at level 4, they read primarily in larger, meaningful phrase groups. There may be some regressions, but they're able to read with expressive interpretation. Okay, where at level 1, the child is still reading word by word with an occasional 2-word or 3-word phrases. So when you look at a student where their fluency levels are, going from non-fluent to fluent, you must consider, like, if they're at level 1, our goal next is to get to level 2. How are we going to reduce those gaps, strengthen those skills to get to level 2? So doing diagnostic assessments to see what the issues are, what the challenges are, to push them with an instructional focus on those targeted areas to get them to level 2. So very systematic approach. Fluency integration, we want to provide extensive and varied word experience for every kind of word, structured, introduce. Also a lot of sight word repetition in different formats, extensive practices, repeated readings are very much research-based and proven to be effective in increasing fluency. So giving the child an opportunity to read and reread different texts is essential in building reading fluency skills. It helps them understand the rhythm. It increases their fluency rates. They get to be familiar with the text, where they can be more comfortable in increasing their expression, their prosody. They focus more on punctuation. So repeated readings are essential in our instructional practices to helping our students who lack this skill. Okay. Syntax and prosody. Researchers argue that expression in reading helps readers chunk the text they read into syntactically appropriate units to assist them in constructing meaning. So we look at noun phrases, verb phrases, prepositional phrase. So as you can see at the picture, we can chunk a sentence into those phrases. So when they go to read, they'll have more fluency. And this is research proven. So just some silent reading research and something to keep in mind when we're in our gen ed classrooms and children are encouraged to do some silent reading. So this is very effective for students with adequate decoding and good vocabulary. But for students who have poor vocabulary, because it is not very effective to engage in silent reading because they require more text discussion than your typical learners. So they're not getting as much from that silent reading as they would if they had that discussion prior. So we look at third and fourth grade as transitional years. So third grade is considered a transitional grade. Most of the reading instruction stops after grade 3. We transition from learning to read to reading to learn. So we always need to remember that it's never too late, even though we want to provide early intervention, and that's always that's the best practices for our students. There is a lot of research that shows word level interventions are appropriate for older students, that this will show progress. Significant impact has been made on the comprehension ability of students in fifth grade and beyond with this type of approach. So such programs as Just Words or the Wilson morphology programs continue to have benefits for kids beyond third and fourth grade, even adults. Okay, so with encoding skills, this becomes a little challenging. Spelling evolves, as does word reading skills. However, spelling is a much more challenging skill to develop. This challenge is due to the fact that the individual has no visual cue when they're spelling. They must mentally segment the sounds into the words, retrieve the appropriate grapheme used to represent each sound, and then produce the word. Many theorists have developed stages or phases of spelling development, and we'll talk about that today. So we'll look at some examples like the word rain or rain. So we must rely on that visual discrimination and recall of the formation of the word. So we'll look at the stages of spelling development. So we start at the pre-phonetic, then go to semi-phonetic, phonetic, transitional, and where we want to be as conventional spellers. So with the pre-phonetic, this is when, our young students, 3 and 4 years old, are just randomly writing letters. And they're writing a story and they're putting things together. They're creating things that really have no letter sound correspondence, and they're showing no knowledge of the alphabetical principles. So this is the pre-phonetic. Then we go to semi-phonetic. So this is where we're starting to see letters that represent easy to hear sounds. So in this example, I walked to the mailbox. You can see that the beginning sounds are presented here, but not much else. They're substituting sounds and omitting sounds. As the phonetic stage, they're representing all the speech sounds. I walked to the mailbox. And then when we transition, we're integrating some orthographic patterns. I walked to the mailbox. Conventional is where you're using the sounds, patterns, and meaning more effectively. So when we look at the stage of development, as with anything, we're not going to get from the pre-phonetic to the conventional stage by providing interventions. We have to look at this as a stage-by-stage progression. So if a student is at the semi-phonetic stage and they're making these type of errors, you do an error analysis and you provide interventions to target the medial sounds, the ending sounds, so they can get to improve the semi-phonetic stage and add more sounds to represent what they're hearing. Then you transition down to the phonetic. When you're getting to the phonetic, then you work on those rules and sound clusters and things like that, word parts, to get them to the transitional stage. So that's just an example of how we have to think about spelling, as with anything, but especially spelling as a developmental process. So look at stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 in a step-by-step fashion, providing interventions to target the areas of deficit.